From historically haunted old forts where it's said the souls of those lost in wars held long ago still wander, to famous restaurants boasting pasts spanning centuries and paranormal activity to prove it. Some call this city the supernatural capital of the United States. Are you ready for the most haunted places in the one and only Savannah, Georgia? Number 5. The Davenport House Museum. The Davenport House Museum, located off Columbia Square on East State Street in Savannah's historic district, is a historic house turned museum that boasts the reputation of being one of the oldest brick structures in the city. The abode was originally constructed in 1820 by Isaiah Davenport for he, his wife, their 10 children, and 9 slaves. Isaiah would pass on in 1827, and, following his death, his wife, Sarah Clark Davenport, would convert the property into a boarding house in order to afford to remain there with their children. In 1840, Sarah sold the home to the Baynard family, who would retain ownership until 1949, and after which it would sit abandoned for a time. In 1955, the abode barely escaped demolition, saved by its utilization as office space for the newly formed Historic Savannah Foundation, along with a family services agency. After recognizing its potential, in 1963, the home's first floor was opened to the public as a museum. Eventually, over the following years, the second and third floors were opened up as well, and the Historic Savannah Foundation moved its offices to another site. Through the mid-1990s, the museum underwent a series of restorations, refurbishments, and modernizations. In 2005, the Davenport House Museum received the Preserve America Presidential Award, and in 2010, it received a Georgia Governor's Award in the humanities. The museum remains open to this day, offering a glimpse at what life was like in the era, a range of exhibits, a charming meeting and events venue in its garden, and, according to local legend, a host of chilling hauntings. Across the property, visitors, staff, and workmen have reported shadowy figures that slink about, strange mists and orbs that appear later in photographs, and full-bodied apparitions spanning the eras, some suspected to be ghosts of the house's original owners. A ghostly cat, purportedly watching over the grounds, has been sighted darting from room to room or sitting in windows, but can never be located when anyone actually goes looking for it, and many describe the constant feeling of being watched at a distance. Also reported at the museum are disembodied voices, whispers, and footsteps, extreme cold spots, lights flickering with no known cause, and accounts of doors and cabinets opening and closing by themselves. Lastly, the specter of a little girl has been seen and heard playing in the attic, running outside, and darting from room to room within the home, and has been known to disappear when approached. Passers-by often recount sighting her staring from various windows at the street below, most often from the top floor. Number 4. The Pirate's House. The Pirate's House off East Broad Street in Savannah is a long-running pirate-themed restaurant housed in a historic, rustic inn that boasts its reputation as one of the oldest and most infamous buildings in Savannah, and that's adjoining smaller structure, the Herb House, is actually the oldest building in the whole of Georgia. The plot of land the Pirate's House now sits on was initially designated as grounds for a botanical garden in James Oglethorpe's original plan for Savannah, and the garden quickly proved successful in growing both cotton and peach trees, which the state of Georgia is now known for. The herb house was constructed in 1734 to house the yard's gardener. In 1754, after the need for a gardener had faded, the herb house was expanded upon and transformed into an inn and tavern for sailors and travelers. In 1948, the Pirate's House and surrounding lands were acquired by the Savannah Gas Company. The building later caught the interest of one Mary Hillyer, wife of the company's president. Mary, along with a group of local women, dedicated themselves to restoring the building in its entirety. The modern restaurant held within the Pirate's House was founded in 1953 by Herb Traub and Jim Casey as a tea room, and eventually evolved into a full-service dining establishment. The house remains open to this day as a prominent restaurant, bar, historic site, and event space. As history and local legend have it, fights, murders, and sickness are thought to have caused many deaths on site through the past, and a tunnel in the basement that's been covered up is said to have been utilized in the kidnapping and shanghaiing of countless men. Across the property, many report disembodied footsteps, orbs and mists visible to the naked eye, and voices, screams, and moans emanating from the old sealed-off tunnel. A host of full-bodied apparitions have been encountered, ranging from pirates to sailors, businessmen to soldiers, and everything in between, and shadowy silhouettes have been sighted roaming at night. One of the most famous phenomenon experienced at the Pirate's House, both by patrons and employees, is the sudden feeling of not being alone, followed by the sighting of an old-fashioned seaman who's been known to vanish when noticed. Also reported throughout the old building are objects sighted moving on their own, instances of drinks disappearing, and the phantom smells of foods, perfumes, and herbs from long ago. Lastly, the Pirate's House is said to be haunted by the spirit of Captain Flint, a character from Robert Louis Stevenson's novel Treasure Island, who's said to have died in Savannah. Although fictional, to this day, many report encountering a fearsome, ghostly pirate matching his description to a T, begging the question, could Stevenson have taken his inspiration for the character from a real person? Number 3. Madison Square. Madison Square, located on Bull between Harris and Charlton Streets in Savannah, is a city square, park, and community space that takes its name after the 4th President of the United States, James Madison, and that stands as one of the city's most popular and picturesque squares and parks. From September 16th to October 18th of 1779, land the square sits on would play host to the Siege of Savannah, during which American troops attempted to reclaim the city from the British, who had taken it a year prior. The battle resulted in a British victory, with control of Savannah remaining in British hands until 1782. The square was initially designed in 1837 and was first laid out 2 years later in 1839. In 1853, St. John's Episcopal Church was erected on the square, and the same year, construction of the Green Meldrum House on the northwest corner of the square was started, and would conclude by 1861. In 1888, a monument was constructed at the center of the square in honor of Sergeant William Jasper, a brave soldier killed in the siege over a century prior. In 1971, a range of new walk platforms, benches, lighting, and foliage were added to the square, in a project headed by Savannah landscape architect Claremont Huger Lee. Today, Madison Square is surrounded by a selection of restaurants, shops, and historically significant sites, and the square itself boasts 2 vintage cannons donated by the Savannah Armory. The most famous local legend surrounding Madison Square tells that a mass grave, holding the bodies of soldiers from the Battle of Savannah, is located directly below it. Disturbingly, some versions of this legend tell that not all men thrown into this grave were entirely dead, and bodies of British soldiers have been discovered while digging for the basements of buildings around the square's perimeter. Reported throughout Madison are EVPs captured in the backgrounds of phone calls and recordings, orbs and mists and photographs, and the full-bodied apparitions of soldiers spied roaming the park after dark. The Sorrel Weed House was constructed between 1835 and 1840 and now acts as a museum. Disturbingly, it's said Matilda Sorrel, along with a servant named Molly, committed suicide within, though in more recent times the location of this travesty has been heavily debated. Regardless, visitors to Madison often report sighting female apparitions staring from the old home onto the square below, and a number of accounts tell of ghostly lights, like those of kerosene lanterns, sighted floating through the halls. One of the more common phenomena experienced at Madison Square are run-ins with a large, shadowy apparition that has been known to appear to tour groups and even follow the living at great lengths. Lastly, in 1864, after Union troops captured Savannah, General William Sherman occupied the Green Meldrum House and utilized it as a headquarters until the end of the war, and in 1943 it was sold to St. John's Church next door. Many passing the old home have reported loud bangs, musket fire, and even the apparitions of Civil War soldiers, who are known to fade shortly after being noticed. Number 2. Old Fort Jackson. Old Fort Jackson, formerly known as Fort James Jackson, and located off Fort Jackson Road on the Savannah River about 3 miles east of the city of Savannah, is a historic fort turned museum that's named in honor of James Jackson, a British-born political figure in Georgia history who served as Georgia's governor from 1798 to 1801. Impressively, this fort is actually the oldest standing brick fortification in the state. The fort was initially constructed between the years of 1808 and 1812 over an older earthen barricade known as Mud Fort, which dated back to Revolutionary times. This new structure, intended to protect the city through the War of 1812. Through the 1840s and 1850s, 2 periods of additional construction took place at the fort, resulting in further expansion. And through the American Civil War, it was one of 3 Confederate forts used in the defense of Savannah against Union forces, with the other 2 being Fort McAllister and Fort Pulaski. When the Union Army, headed by General William T. Sherman, captured Savannah in December of 1864, it took Fort Jackson almost immediately. In 1884, the U.S. Army would change the site's name to Fort Oglethorpe for a time, until 1905, after which it was decommissioned and abandoned entirely. In 1924, the property was purchased by the city of Savannah for the use of creating a park, and in 1965 it was opened up as a maritime museum, but was sadly shut down again in 1975. A year later, in 1976, the newly formed Coastal Heritage Society approached the state, asking permission to reopen and operate the site, a permission which was granted. Old Fort Jackson was designated a National Historic Landmark in the year 2000 and remains open to the public to this day, offering a range of educational materials alongside the Fort Jackson Maritime Museum. Stories of the supernatural have long surrounded this old defensive structure, with even those who haven't experienced direct paranormal activity often describing the fort as having an eerie, unsettling atmosphere, as giving chills and causing hair to stand on end. And all across the premises, many report disembodied voices, footsteps from empty halls, and extreme cold spots. The apparitions of Confederate soldiers have been sighted doing rounds, and shadowy figures have been known to stalk the living after dark. Also reported throughout Jackson are orbs captured in photographs, doors opening and closing on their own, objects sighted moving by themselves, and otherworldly sounds from behind locked doors. Local legend tells that activity at the fort has gotten so bad, it's resulted in several janitors and security officers actually quitting their jobs. Lastly, the most famous story surrounding Old Fort Jackson tells of Confederate Private Patrick Garrity, who, for reasons unknown, attacked his lieutenant, one George Dickerson. Some claim the spout was over a girl, others that Dickerson was anti-Irish and anti-Catholic. Whatever the cause, it resulted in Garrity beating Dickerson with his musket until it literally broke in half, fracturing his skull. When nearby soldiers heard the fight and rushed to Dickerson's aid, it said Garrity ran and jumped into the moat in an attempt to flee, but drowned midway. It's recorded that Dickerson survived the attack, but never fully recovered. A spirit donning Confederate garb, believed to be that of Garrity, has been sighted walking the parade grounds, or standing near the drawbridge, often only manifesting from the waist up. Nostalgically, each year, a single Fort Jackson reenactor is granted the Garrity Award for their dedication, an award shaped like the musket Dickerson was beaten with, and each year, dating back to the first award, something has always gone awry. Often, pieces of the musket are found missing, and later discovered at the drawbridge. Number 1. Colonial Park Cemetery. Colonial Park Cemetery, located off Abercorn Street in downtown Savannah, is a 6-acre historic cemetery turned city park that boasts the title of being the oldest cemetery in Savannah that can still be identified as such. While there are several older yards, the rest have been altered or covered up in some way or another. The cemetery was initially established in 1750 when Savannah acted as the capital of the British province of Georgia, with the burying grounds designated for the Christ Church parish. As the yard picked up steam, by 1789 it had expanded to nearly 3 times its original size, to its current 6 acres, and was opened up to burials of any denomination. While the cemetery was closed to burials in 1853 before the Civil War, and as such didn't inter resulting casualties, it is said to have played home to a Union campground for a time, during which it's rumored several markers and vaults were defaced by soldiers. Following the Civil War, the cemetery came under threat of being covered up, as were many others of its era, but in 1896 it was turned into a city park instead, after which the Park and Tree Commission would launch efforts to revitalize the property. In 1967, the Trustees Garden Club took up the task of performing a significant restoration of the site, and in 1990 the city of Savannah launched a preservation project aimed at maintaining the cemetery for future generations. Colonial Park Cemetery remains open to the public to this day from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. and contains around 1,000 grave markers, though it's estimated the expanse may hold upwards of 10,000 bodies. Chillingly, Colonial Park Cemetery is widely considered to be one of the most haunted locations in Savannah, with many speculating activity as a direct result of destruction of property, erosion from time, and improper burials via mass graves. To top things off, the site once acted as a dueling grounds, and many men were said to have lost their lives to fights gone too far. Reported across park grounds are EVPs captured in the backgrounds of recordings and phone calls, high EMF levels and electrical disturbances, disembodied voices, and the constant feeling of being watched or followed. One infamous local legend tells of Renee Rondelier, who is said to have been 7 feet tall and who enjoyed torturing people in life. It's said Rondelier's parents tried to keep him trapped behind a wall, but that one night he broke free and was found in the cemetery with the bodies of 2 dead girls. Legend furthers to tell that when word got around, the town formed a mob, hunted Renee down, and hanged him. Shortly after his death, however, a slew of bodies began appearing in the cemetery, and locals began whispering of a large, shadowy entity that manifested at the burying grounds after dark, many claiming Renee, so evil that hell itself had returned him. While no historic records surrounding Renee have ever been located, to this day, many describe an unnaturally large shadow figure that stalks the yard, that can occasionally be seen hanging ominously from trees. Also reported across Colonial Park are extreme hot and cold spots, strange lights in the skies above, and a range of apparitions in clothing spanning the ages, some appearing lost, as though they're searching for their rightful final resting places. Lastly, one of the more famous duels to take place on site occurred in 1777 between Button Gwinnett and Lachlan McIntosh, following a particularly harsh argument in the General Assembly. It's recorded that McIntosh was victorious and killed Gwinnett with his first gunshot from only 12 feet away. Today, this spot holds the duelist's grave plaque, a memorial to all those who senselessly lost their lives by similar means, and many nearing the area have reported hearing disembodied voices arguing, the clash of blades, or gunshots so real they've prompted calls to the local police. With its ridiculously fascinating and slightly dark history, slew of associated local fables, urban legends, and ghost stories, and abundance of seemingly legitimate supernatural encounters and paranormal activity, we felt there really was no better choice than Colonial Park Cemetery as our pick for the most haunted place in Savannah. Thank you all for tuning into our list of picks for the most haunted places in Savannah, Georgia. If you enjoyed hearing our histories and ghost stories as much as we enjoyed telling them to you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn notifications on so you get an alert when fresh content is on the way. Throw us a like if you feel we've earned it, and most importantly, share this video and our channel with anyone you think deserves a good scare. We'll see you all next time.